Here are some of the most mind-bending mysteries Graham Hancock has ever talked about. Stories that question everything we think we know about ancient Egypt. Hidden chambers, secret tunnels, and evidence that the ancient world might have been far more advanced than history admits. Tonight, you're not just going to fall asleep. You're going to descend into the forgotten world beneath the sands. And it all starts with one of the strangest discoveries ever whispered about: a vast underground city, said to lie beneath the Egyptian pyramids. A network so large that even modern radar can't map its limits. When Graham Hancock was asked about it, his answer wasn't simple. He said the evidence might already exist, just not where we're looking. So tonight, let's open that hidden door beneath the desert and listen to what Graham Hancock believes the ancients were really hiding.
I'm far from ready to take a position on the recent claims of underground structures detected beneath the Khafre Pyramid at Giza. I'm not even sitting on the fence, because there isn't a fence to sit on yet. Much more work needs to be done. What is clear, however, is that critics of Filippo Biondì's findings have misunderstood the potential of the method used and have been too hasty in dismissing it. In my opinion, the importance of Biondì's work is not that it proves anything at this stage, but that it should act as a spur for further research, which I have reason to believe will soon follow. So I could read more of it, but it's on my website, it's in my blog, and that is my statement of position. I don't know enough about the technology, but I have been working with a number of other people who know a lot more about it than I do. And it's beginning to be clear that the massive, instant, allergic reaction of dismissal that came from all the usual skeptics about the Filippo Biondì's work, that instant rejection, that instant hostility, that instant sneering was yet another example of premature rejection in science. It's too early to reject this idea. The idea actually has quite a number of very interesting things going for it. And I will be appearing with Filippo Biondi sometime next week with him and Armando May and Corrado Malanga and my colleague Mano Seifzada as well. Primarily, we want to understand their method better. We're not amongst those who are saying, "Oh, this is rubbish, go away." We think it's interesting, and there are a number of ways to validate it or invalidate it further, and that's what needs to be done next. Nobody should be jumping to any immediate conclusions, either one way or the other on this. What we have here is an interesting, innovative, actually quite brilliant use of two technologies to arrive at subsurface imagery. Will that brilliance check out completely? More work needs to be done. Right now, I just think it's really interesting, it's worth exploring further, and I intend to stay on top of what's happening.
Is there resistance from Egypt over looking deeper into this?
I think in Egypt the issue is that they, again, when I use the word allergic reaction, it's partly because people in these fields have been, whether it's archaeology or Egyptology, which is a sort of subspecialism of archaeology, have been bombarded over the years with so much, quite honestly, rubbish, from people with badly thought through ideas about, for example, Giza and what it might mean, that it's become a kind of automatic reaction on their part now to just dismiss everything that sounds in any way, fanciful or New Age, and that's most unfortunate, because they should realize that just as there is a diversity of opinion within archaeology, there's also a diversity of opinion on the opposite sides, and there are some very serious people working on what I don't have any choice but to characterize as the alternative as opposed to the mainstream side of archaeology. And I think it's unfortunate that the mainstream side of archaeology is so dismissive. What would have been much better would have been if they said nothing and got to grips with Filippo Biondì's method and what he's actually doing, the science that is actually involved. If they got to grips with that first, before pouring scorn on it, so much the better. But they didn't. They just instantly reacted and poured scorn and again attempted to shape the narrative so that nobody will take this seriously. And that's too early for that to happen. This is potentially a very interesting method, and we need to see where it's going to take us. So I hope to learn more about it when I talk with the instigators next week.
Yeah, I've heard theories that the pyramids could be a power plant. Is there any validity to that?
Look, I mean, was it
Christopher Dunn?
Was it Obama who said that he could walk and chew gum at the same time? The reason I'm citing that is maybe the pyramids are more than one thing. You know, maybe they're not just one thing. There's a lot of possibilities, and the Great Pyramid is just a lot. There's so much to take in the Great Pyramid, and the detailed intricacy of its inner corridors and passageways, and its hidden shafts, and its bizarre, extraordinary well shaft that connects the bottom of the Grand Gallery to the subterranean chamber. It's really, I mean, it is the most extraordinary thing. I have no doubt in my own mind that amongst the tasks that the Great Pyramid serves is fundamentally a spiritual task. That this is fundamentally a piece of spiritual machinery that we're looking at here, that the ancient Egyptians saw and understood a relationship between the living and the dying, between the afterlife and this life, and that they depicted it in certain ways. You can see on ancient Egyptian tombs, for example, the tomb of Thutmose III, you can see depictions of the Duat, of this underworld realm, or celestial realm, because it appears weirdly to be both. And they very much resemble the interior corridors and passageways of the Great Pyramid. So I just don't think it's possible to separate the Great Pyramid from the spiritual connection that the ancient Egyptians undoubtedly attached to it and saw it as serving. But could it have done other things as well? Why not? I think Chris Dunn's work is fascinating. I've known Chris since the early 1990s. He's a very thorough researcher. He knows his stuff when he's talking about machine tools. And he sees levels of machining and accuracy in the Great Pyramid that he doesn't see why that would be necessary for spiritual purposes. But it might be necessary to serve a material function. So I'm open to that. It's just not where I've gone with this material. I'm regarding the Great Pyramid as a place of spiritual manifestation. I think it was used for that in ancient Egyptian times. I think the role of altered states of consciousness in ancient Egyptian spirituality is one of those matters that needs to be further investigated. We know they used psychedelics of various sorts, but I think that the prospect of the initiate being placed alone in the heart of the Great Pyramid, in total darkness, with all the doors that then existed closed, that would be a place where an altered state of consciousness peak effect would be achieved. And so I think that some of what sound like out-of-body journeys that are described in the ancient Egyptian funerary texts, in the pyramid text, for example, may be based on direct experience by ancient Egyptian priests, if you like. Out-of-body journeys brought on perhaps by psychedelics. Of course, my critics will laugh at that, but, I suggest they go take a pipe of DMT and see how they feel after that.
When I first heard that part, my mind exploded. But what Graham talks about next goes even deeper, not beneath the pyramids this time, but into the mystery of the afterlife itself. What the ancient Egyptians believed would happen to your soul after your last breath.
So there are particular issues. For example, the notion of the afterlife destiny of the soul. What happens to us when we die? And believe me, when you reach my age, that's something you do think about. What happens? I used to feel immortal when I was in my 40s, but now that I'm 74, I definitely know that I'm not. Well, it would be natural for human beings all around the world to have that same feeling, that same idea. But why would they all decide that what happens to the soul after death is that it makes a leap to the heavens, to the Milky Way, that it makes a journey along the Milky Way, that there it is confronted by challenges, by monsters, by closed gates. The course of the life that that person has lived will determine their destiny in that afterlife journey. And this idea, the path of souls, the Milky Way is called the path of souls. It's very strongly found in the Americas, right from South America through Mexico, through into North America, but it's also found in ancient Egypt, in ancient India, in ancient Mesopotamia, the same idea. And I don't feel that that can be a coincidence. I feel that what we're looking at is an inheritance of an idea, a legacy that's been passed down from a remote common source to cultures all around the world, and then has taken on a life of its own within those cultures. So the remote common source would explain both the similarities and the differences in the expression of these ideas. The other thing, very puzzling thing, is this sequence of numbers that are a result of the precession of the equinoxes. At least I think that's the best theory to explain them. Here, I think it's important to pay tribute to the work of Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Deschend. Giorgio de Santillana was professor of history of science, actually at MIT, where you're based, back in the 60s. And Hertha von Deschend was professor of the history of science at Frankfurt University. And they wrote an immense book in the 1960s called Hamlet's Mill. And Hamlet's Mill differs very strongly from established opinion on the issue of the phenomenon of precession, and I'll explain what precession is in a moment. Generally, it's held that it was the Greeks who discovered the precession, and the dating on that is put back not very far, maybe 2,300 years ago or so. Santillana and von Deschend are pointing out that knowledge of precession is much, much older than that, thousands of years older than that, and they do actually trace it, I think I'm quoting them pretty much correctly, to some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization. Reading that book was one of the several reasons that I got into this mystery in the first place. Okay, now, the precession of the equinoxes, to give it its full name, results from the fact that our planet is the viewing platform from which we observe the stars. And our planet, of course, is rotating on its own axis at roughly 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. But what's less obvious is that it's also wobbling on its axis. And so if you imagine the extended north pole of the Earth pointing up at the sky, in our time, it's pointing at the star Polaris, and that is our pole star. But Polaris has not always been the pole star, precisely because of this wobble on the axis of the Earth. Other stars have occupied the pole position, and sometimes the extended north pole of the Earth points at empty space. There is no pole star. That's one of the obvious results of the wobble on the Earth's axis. The other one is that there are 12 well-known constellations in our time, the 12 constellations of the zodiac, that lie along what is referred to as the path of the sun. The Earth is orbiting the sun, and we are seeing what's behind it, what's in direct line with the sun in our view. And the zodiacal constellations all lie along the path of the sun. So at different times of the year, the sun will rise against the background of a particular zodiacal constellation. Today we live in the age of Pisces, and it's definitely not an accident that the early Christians used the fish as their symbol. This is another area where I differ from archaeology. I think the constellations of the zodiac were recognized as such much earlier than we suppose. Anyway, to get to the point, the key marker of the year, certainly in the northern hemisphere, was the spring equinox. The question was, what constellation is rising behind the sun? What constellation is housing the sun at dawn on the spring equinox? Right now it's Pisces. In another 150 years or so, it'll be Aquarius. We do live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Back in the time of the late ancient Egyptians, it was Aries, going back to the time of Ramesses or before. Before that, it was Taurus, and so on and so forth. It's backwards through the zodiac until 12,500 years ago, you come to the age of Leo, when the constellation of Leo houses the sun on the spring equinox. Now, this process unfolds very, 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 very slowly. The whole cycle, and it is a cycle, it repeats itself roughly every 26,000 years. Put a more exact figure on it, 25,920 years. That may be a convention. Some scholars would say it was a bit less than that, a bit more, but you're talking fractions. It's in that area, 25,920 years. To observe it, you really need more than one human lifetime, because it unfolds very, very slowly at a rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And the parallel that I often give is hold your finger up to the horizon, the distant horizon. The movement in one lifetime in a period of 72 years is about the width of your finger. It's not impossible to notice in a lifetime, but it's difficult. You've got to pass it on. And what seems to have happened is that some ancient culture, the culture that Santillana and von Deschen call some almost unbelievable ancestor culture, worked out the entire process of precession and selected the key numbers of precession, of which the most important number, the governing number, is the number 72. But we also have numbers related to the number 72. 72 plus 36 is 108. 108 divided by 2 is 54. These numbers are also found in mythology all around the world. There were 72 conspirators who were involved in killing the god Osiris in ancient Egypt and nailing him up in a wooden coffer and dumping him in the Nile. There are 432,000 in the Rig Veda. 432,000 is a multiple of 72. At Angkor in Cambodia, for example, you have the bridge to Angkor Thom, and on that bridge you have figures on both sides, sculpted figures, which are holding the body of a serpent. That serpent is Vasuki, and what they're doing is they're churning the Milky Ocean. It's the same metaphor of churning and turning that's defined in the story of Hamlet's mill, of Amlodi's mill. There are 54 on each side. 54 plus 54 is 108. 108 is 72 plus 36. It's a precessional number, according to the work that Santillana and von Deschen did. And the fascination with this number system and its discovery all around the world is one of the puzzles that intrigue me and suggest to me that we are looking at ancestral knowledge that was passed down, and probably was passed down from a specific single common source at one time, but then was spread out very, very widely around the world.
So one of the defining ways that you approach the study of human history that I think contrasts with mainstream archaeology is you take this sort of astronomical symbolism and the relationship between humans and the stars very seriously.
I do, as I believe the ancients did.
I think it's important to sort of consider what humans would have thought about back then. Now we have a lot of distractions. We have social media. We can watch videos on YouTube and whatever. Mm-hmm. But back then, especially before sort of electricity, the stars is like the sexiest thing to talk about.
There's no light pollution.
There's no light pollution, so there's the
majesty of the heavens.
Every single night you're spending looking up at the stars, and you can imagine there's a lot of sort of status value to be the guy who's very good at studying the stars, and sort of the scientists of the day. And I'm sure there's going to be these geniuses that emerge that are able to do two things. One, tell stories about the gods or whatever based on the stars, and then also, as we'll probably talk about, use the stars practically for navigation, for example.
Oh yeah,
definitely. And so like it makes sense that the stars had a primal importance for the ideas of the times, for the status, for religious explorations.
It was an ever-present reality.
Yes.
And it was bright, and it was brilliant, and it was full of lights. It's inconceivable that the ancients would not have paid attention to it. It was an overwhelming presence, and that's one of the reasons why I'm really confident that the constellations that we now recognize as the constellations of the zodiac were recognized much earlier, because it's hard to miss when you pay attention to the sky that the sun over the course of the solar year is month by month rising against the background of different constellations. And then there's a much longer process, the process of precession, which takes that journey backwards, and where we have a period of 2,160 years for each sign of the zodiac. I think it would have been hard for the ancients to have missed that. They might not have identified the constellations in exactly the same way we do today. That may well be a Babylonian or Greek convention, but that the constellations were there, I think was very clear, and that they were special constellations, unlike other ones higher up in the sky, which were not on the path of the sun, that people paid attention to.
Well, but detecting the precession of the equinox is hard, because especially they don't have any writing systems, they don't have any mathematical systems, so everything is told through words.
Yeah, they have. Let's not underestimate oral traditions. The oral traditions, that's something we've lost in our culture today. It's one of the things that happens with the written word is that you gradually lose your memory. Actually, there's a nice story from ancient Egypt about the god Thoth, the god of wisdom, who is very proud of himself because he has invented writing. Look at this gift, he says to a mythical pharaoh of that time. Look at the gift that I am giving humanity, writing. This is a wonderful thing. It'll enable you to preserve so much that you would otherwise lose. And the pharaoh in this story replies to him, no, you have not given us a wonderful gift. You have destroyed the art of memory. We will forget everything. Words will roam free around the world, not accompanied by any wise advice to set them into context. And actually, that's a very interesting point. And we do know that cultures that still do have oral traditions are able to preserve information for very long periods of time. One thing I think is clear in any time, in any period of history, is human beings love stories. We love great stories. And one way to preserve information is to encode it, embed it in a great story. And so carefully done that actually it doesn't matter whether the storyteller knows that they're passing on that information or not. The story itself is the vehicle, and as long as it's repeated faithfully, the information contained within it will be passed on. And I do think this is part of the story of the preservation of knowledge.
So that's one of the reasons that you take myths seriously.
I take them very seriously, and the other, many reasons, but I can't help being deeply impressed and deeply puzzled by the worldwide tradition of a global cataclysm within human memory. I mean, we know scientifically that there have been many, many cataclysms in the past, going back millions of years. I mean, the best known one, of course, is the KPG event, as it's now called, that made the dinosaurs extinct 65 million or 66 million years ago. But has there been such a cataclysm in the lifetime of the human species? The Mount Toba eruption about 70,000 years ago was pretty bad. But a global cataclysm, the Younger Dryas, really ticks all the boxes as a worldwide disaster, which definitely involved sea level rise, both at the beginning and at the end of the Younger Dryas. It definitely involved the swallowing up of lands that previously had been above water. And I think it's an excellent candidate for this worldwide tradition of a global cataclysm, of which one of, but not the only, distinguishing characteristics was a flood, an enormous flood, and the submergence of lands that had previously been above water, underwater. The fact that this story is found all around the world suggests to me that the archaeological explanation is, look, people suffer local floods all the time. I mean, as we're talking, there's flooding in Florida, but I don't think anybody in Florida is going to make the mistake of believing that that's a global flood. They know it's local, but that's the argument largely of archaeology dealing with the flood myths, or that some local population experienced a nasty local flooding event, and they decided to say that it affected the whole world. I'm not persuaded by that, particularly since we know there was a nasty epoch, the Younger Dryas, when flooding did occur and when the Earth was subjected to events cataclysmic enough to extinguish entirely the megafauna of the Ice Age.
So there is the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis that provides an explanation of what happened during this period that resulted in such rapid environmental change. So can you explain this hypothesis?
Yes. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, YDIH for short, is not a lunatic fringe theory, as its opponents often attempt to write it off. It's the work of more than 60 major scientists, working across many different disciplines, including archaeology and including oceanography as well. They are collectively puzzled by the sudden onset of the Younger Dryas, and by the fact that it is accompanied 12,800 years ago by a distinct layer in the earth. You can see it most clearly at Murray Springs in Arizona, for example. You can see it's about the width of a human hand, and there's a draw there that's been cut by flash flooding at some time, and that draw has revealed the sides of the draw, and you can see the cross section, and in the cross section is this distinct dark layer that runs through the earth, and it contains evidence of wildfires. There's a lot of soot in it. There are also nanodiamonds in it. There is shocked quartz in it. There is quartz that's been melted at temperatures in excess of 2,200 degrees centigrade. There are carbon microspherules. All of these are proxies for some kind of cosmic impact. I talked a moment ago about the extinction of the dinosaurs. Lewis and Walter Alvarez, who made that incredible discovery, initially their discovery was based entirely on impact proxies, just as the Younger Dryas is. There was no crater, and for a long time they were disbelieved because they couldn't produce a crater. But when they finally did produce that deeply buried Chicxulub crater, that's when people started to say, yeah, they have to be right. But they weren't relying on the crater. They were relying on the impact proxies. And they're the same impact proxies that we find in what's called the Younger Dryas boundary layer all around the world. So it's the fact that at the moment when the Earth tips into a radical climate shift, it's been warming up for at least 2,000 years before 12,800 years ago. People at the time must have been feeling a great sense of relief. You know, we've been living through this really cold time, but it's getting better. Things are getting better. And then suddenly around 12,800 years ago, some might say 12,860 years ago, there's a massive global plunge in global temperatures, and the world suddenly gets as cold as it was at the peak of the Ice Age. And it's almost literally overnight. It's very, very, very rapid. Normally, in an epoch when the Earth is going into a freeze, you would not expect sea levels to rise. But there is a sea level rise, a sudden one, right at the beginning of the Younger Dryas. And then you have this long frozen period from 12,800 to 11,600 years ago. And then equally dramatically and equally suddenly, the Younger Dryas comes to an end and the world very rapidly warms up, and you have a recognized pulse of meltwater at that time as the last of the glaciers collapse into the sea, called Meltwater Pulse 1b, around about 11,600 years ago. So this is a period which is very tightly defined. It's a period when we know that human populations were grievously disturbed. That's when the so-called Clovis culture of North America vanished entirely from the record during the Younger Dryas, and it's the time when the mammoths and the saber-toothed tigers vanished from the record as well.
Is there a good understanding of what happened geologically, whether there was an impact or not? Like, what explains this huge dip in temperature and then rise in temperature?
The abrupt cessation of the global meridional overturning circulation, of which the Gulf Stream is the best known part. The main theory that's been put forward up to now, and I don't dispute that theory at all, is that the sudden freeze was caused by the cutting off of the Gulf Stream, basically, which is part of the central heating system of our planet. So no wonder it became cold. But what's not really been addressed before is why that happened, why the Gulf Stream was cut, why a sudden pulse of meltwater went into the world ocean, and it was so much of it, and it was so cold that it actually stopped the Gulf Stream in its tracks. And that's where the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis offers a very elegant and very satisfactory solution to the problem. Now, The hypothesis, of course, is broader than that. Amongst the scientists working on it are, for example, Bill Napier, an astrophysicist and astronomer. They have assembled a great deal of evidence which suggests that the culprit in the Younger Dryas impact event or events was what we now call the torrid meteor stream, which the Earth still passes through twice a year. It's now about 30 million kilometers wide. It takes the Earth a couple of days to pass through it on its orbit. It passed through it in June, and it passes through it at the end of October. The suggestion is that the torrid meteor stream is the end product of a very large comet that entered the solar system round about 20,000 years ago, came in from the Oort cloud, got trapped by the gravity of the sun, and went into orbit around the sun, an orbit that crossed the orbit of the Earth. However, when it was one object, the likelihood of a collision with the Earth was extremely small. But as it started to do what all comets do, which was to break up into multiple fragments, because these are chunks of rock held together by ice, and as they warm up, they split and disintegrate and break into pieces. As it passed through that, its debris stream became larger and larger and wider and wider. And the theory is that 12,800 years ago, the Earth passed through a particularly dense part of the torrid meteor stream and was hit by multiple impacts all around the planet, certainly from the west of North America as far east as Syria. And that we are by and large not talking about impacts that would have caused craters, although there certainly were some. We're talking about airbursts. When an object is 100 or 150 meters in diameter and it's coming in very fast into the Earth's atmosphere, it is very unlikely to reach the Earth. It's going to blow up in the sky. And the best known recent example of that is the Tunguska event in Siberia, which took place on the 30th of June, 1908. The Tunguska event was, nobody disputes, it was definitely an airburst of a cometary fragment. And the date is interesting because the 30th of June is the height of the beta torids. It's one of the two times when the Earth is going through the torrid meteor stream. Well, luckily that part of Siberia wasn't inhabited, but 2,000 square miles of forest were destroyed. If that had happened over a major city, we would all be thinking very hard about objects out of the torrid meteor stream and about the risk of cosmic impact. So the suggestion is that it wasn't one impact, it wasn't two impacts, it wasn't three impacts, it was hundreds of airbursts all around the planet, coupled with a number of bigger objects, which the scientists working on this think hit the North American ice cap largely. Some of them may also have hit the Northern European ice cap, resulting in that sudden, otherwise unexplained flood of meltwater that went into the world ocean and caused the cooling that then took place. But this was a disaster for life all over the planet. And it's interesting that one of the sites where they find the Younger Dryas boundary and where they find overwhelming evidence of an airburst and where they find all the shocked quartz, the carbon microspherules, the nanodiamonds, the trinitite, and so on and so forth, all of those impact proxies are found at Abu Huraira. That was a settlement within 150 miles of Göbekli Tepe, and it was hit 12,800 years ago, and it was obliterated. Interestingly, it was re-inhabited by human beings within probably 5 years, but it was completely obliterated at that time. And it's difficult to imagine that the people who lived in that area would not have been very impressed by what they saw happening, by these massive explosions in the sky and the obliteration of Abu Huraira. Now, this is a theory. The Younger Dryas impact, it's a hypothesis, actually. It's not even a theory. A theory is, I think, considered a higher level than a hypothesis. That's why it's the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And of course, it has many opponents, and there are many who disagree with it. And there have been a series of peer-reviewed papers that have been published supposedly debunking the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. One, I think, was in 2011. It was called a requiem for the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. And there's one just been published a few months ago or a year ago, called a complete refutation of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, something like that, some lengthy title. So it's a hypothesis that has its opponents. And even within those of us who are looking at the alternative side of history, there are different points of view. Robert Schoch from Boston University, the geologist who demonstrated that the erosion on the Sphinx may well have been caused by exposure to a long period of very heavy rainfall. He doesn't go for the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. He fully accepts that the Younger Dryas was a global cataclysm and that the extinctions took place, but he thinks it was caused by some kind of massive solar outburst. So what everybody's agreed on is the Younger Dryas was bad, but there is dispute about what caused it. I personally have found the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis to be the most persuasive, which most effectively explains all the evidence.
How important is the impact hypothesis to your understanding of the Ice Age advanced civilizations? So is it possible to have another explanation for environmental factors that could have erased most of an advanced civilization during this period?
In a sense, it's not the impact hypothesis that is central to what I'm saying. It's the Younger Dryas that's central to what I'm saying. And the Younger Dryas required a trigger. Something caused it. I think the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the notion that we're looking at a debris stream of a fragmenting comet, and we can still see that debris stream because it's still up there, and we still pass through it twice a year, is the best explanation. But I don't mind other explanations. It's good that there are other explanations. The Younger Dryas is a big mystery, and it's not a mystery that's been solved yet. And that word advanced civilization, this is another word that is easily misunderstood. And I've tried to make clear many, many times that when we consider the possibility of something like a civilization in the past, we shouldn't imagine that it's us, that it's something like us. We should expect it to be completely different from us, but that it would have achieved certain things. So amongst the clues that intrigue me are those precessional numbers that are found all around the world, and are a category of ancient maps called portolanos, which suddenly started to appear just after the crusade that entered Constantinople and sacked Constantinople. The portolanos suddenly start to appear. And they're extremely accurate maps. Most of the ones that have survived are extremely accurate maps of the Mediterranean alone, but some of them show much wider areas. For example, on these Portolano-style maps, you do find a depiction of Antarctica again and again. And another thing that these maps have in common is that many of the map makers state that they based their maps on multiple older source maps, which have not survived. These maps are intriguing because they have very accurate relative longitudes.
And once, in another interview, someone asked Graham about the wildest mysteries of the pyramids themselves. What he said about their true purpose, their impossible precision, and what might still be hidden inside will make you question everything you thought you knew about ancient Egypt.
What are some of the most mysterious things, if you had to sort of condense it with regards to the pyramid?
With regards to the Great Pyramid, well, almost everything is mysterious. First of all, the sheer size and mass of it. The notion that 2.5 million blocks could be brought to that place in 23 or 28 years and erected into a pyramid that actually works is itself absurd. But it's not just the mass. Here you have this 481-foot high original monument with a footprint of almost 14 acres. That's its footprint. And the builders managed to align it almost perfectly, within just a tiny fraction of a single degree, to true north, south, east, and west. Now, modern builders will tell you that if they were commissioned to produce a monument on the scale of the Great Pyramid, they probably could do it, giving enough time and enough technology and enough of a workforce. But then to be required to align it perfectly to true north, that would complicate their task enormously. And building a pyramid isn't just a matter of heaping stones on top of each other. It has to be understood that with a pyramid, you put down your first course. If you get the second course slightly wrong and the third course just a little bit more wrong, by the time you get to the top, you don't have a pyramid, you have a corkscrew. So this all has to be taken great care of. And that's what the Great Pyramid testifies to. And it does so in a way that no matter the efforts that are made, we cannot explain how this thing was built. Then you come to the cavities inside the Great Pyramid, the various chambers. The subterranean chamber, let's start there. That's 100 feet vertically beneath the base of the Great Pyramid. And it's actually cut, the passageway that leads down to it is cut almost entirely out of solid bedrock, not out of the body of the pyramid, which is above it, but out of solid bedrock. And then you come into this chamber. If you're claustrophobic, it's a pretty scary place to be when you think there's a 6 million ton monument 100 feet above you. The view of Egyptologists is that they went to all this effort to create the passageway. Let me specify that as well. Every passageway in the Great Pyramid slopes at an angle of 26 degrees. That's not an accident, because the exterior of the Great Pyramid slopes at an angle of 52 degrees. 26 plus 26 is 52. So the internal corridors and passageways slope at half the angle of slope of the pyramid itself. Mathematicians were clearly at work. The view of Egyptologists is, they decided they were going to bury Khufu in this subterranean chamber. So they made that first. But then when they'd done that, they changed their minds and decided they would relocate him. They would put him somewhere else in the Great Pyramid. So then they built another chamber higher up, which Egyptologists now know as the Queen's Chamber, with no good reason. Nothing to do with any queen. And then that wasn't satisfactory either. So then they decided they'd put him in a chamber even higher up, and that's the chamber that Egyptologists call the King's Chamber. On the way to the King's Chamber, first of all, as you enter the pyramid, you're going to go up an ascending corridor, which also slopes at 26 degrees. Then you're going to find yourself at the level of the Queen's Chamber. And then you're going to be confronted by the Grand Gallery, which is 150 feet long, almost 30 feet high, a corbel vault, astonishing piece of engineering and architecture in the heart of this gigantic monument. And that's only what you can see with the naked eye. Once you go further, most people who go to the King's Chamber don't realize that there are 5 additional chambers above the King's Chamber. I've been in those chambers, fortunately. It's not an easy task. You have to put a wooden ladder up against the top edge of the Grand Gallery. And right above you, you can just see it because the light is quite gloomy when you go in. If you're not on the lookout for it, you won't see it. There's a hole, sort of square hole. And actually that hole didn't exist in antiquity. That's a result of a British vandal called Howard Vyse in the 1850s who blew it open with dynamite. He suspected there might be something above the King's Chamber. And sure enough, there is. There's 5 more chambers above it. And what you do is you climb up that ladder, and then Egyptian authorities have kindly left a rope there, and you haul yourself up through that rope into this system of additional passageways, which Egyptologists say were built to relieve the pressure on the King's Chamber of the weight above it, which one can immediately reject because no such chambers exist above the Queen's Chamber lower down, and it has even more weight on its top. So there's those hidden features. And by the way, the floors and ceilings of each of those 5 chambers are roofed with or floored with blocks weighing 70 tons each, blocks of granite that were brought from Aswan 500 kilometers to the south of Giza. And then we have narrow shafts which emanate from the walls of the King's Chamber and from the walls of the so-called Queen's Chamber. In the case of the King's Chamber, those shafts do in fact exit on the outside of the pyramid. But in the case of the Queen's Chamber, they don't. And in fact, nobody knew they were there until 1872. And that was when a British researcher named John Wayman Dixon, intrigued by the shafts in the higher chamber, in the King's Chamber, thought, could there be shafts here in this chamber? It didn't seem to be. He went round knocking on the walls, and he found, sure enough, on one side and on the other, a hollow point, south side and north side. And he started hammering against that, and with a chisel, they broke through, and they found that indeed there is a shaft there. And it had been hidden for thousands of years with a block covering it, which just looked like one of the normal blocks of the walls of the Queen's Chamber. And then next thing to do, this shaft does not exit on the outside of the Great Pyramid. What's it leading to? Rudolf Gantenbrink was the first to build a robot to explore the shafts of the Queen's Chamber. And he discovered his robot, which was called Upuaut, the opener of the ways, an ancient Egyptian idea, discovered that each of these shafts at a distance of about 165 feet from the entrance was blocked by a door. A little door. The shafts are only, that wide and that high. A little door with two metal handles. And it's like, you've come this far, but we're not going to let you go any further. Well, modern technology got around that. They built a second robot. They put a drill on the front of it with a camera. They drilled a hole through the door. And what did they find? A few feet away, another door blocking them. And the technological challenge of getting through that other door has not yet been solved. Meanwhile, there's been a very interesting scanning project on the Great Pyramid using muon rays, and this has detected a large number of other intriguing cavities within the Great Pyramid. There appears to be an entire second Grand Gallery above the Grand Gallery, which nobody's got into. But I think the Egyptian authorities have plans to either to put a camera in there in some way or to use enhanced scanning to find out what's inside it. It's a huge space that nobody knew existed until this scanning was done. Another such thing was found just above the original entrance to the Great Pyramid. Nobody knew it was there until a couple of years ago. This monument, the last surviving wonder of the ancient world, is still reluctantly revealing its secrets to us. And when I say reluctantly, it's almost like a challenge. It sits there like a huge challenge on the Giza Plateau, saying, figure me out, work out what I am, ask me questions. If you ask the right way, I will answer those questions. And it is stimulating the curiosity of curious people to find out more and more about it. And that's one of the things I think it was built to do. I think it was built to stimulate curiosity. It was built to encourage people to explore it and not to come at it with a single unified mindset, but to come at it from many different points of view. So, of course, Egyptologists say that it's completely irrelevant and just a coincidence and an accident that on a scale of 1 to 43,200, the height of the Great Pyramid, if you take the height of the original height, 481 feet, if you take that height and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply that number by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. Egyptologists know this. They don't dispute it. Even Flint Dibble accepts those figures. But he says, it's just rubbish. It's just numbers. It's just a coincidence. It's not important at all. What makes it important? I wouldn't regard it as important if the scale was 1 to 57,000. Random number, but 43,200 is not a random number. It's a number derived from an astronomical phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes. That phenomenon that I mentioned at the beginning that Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Deschen focused on in their book Hamlet's Mill. And precession is a wobble on the axis of the Earth. The Earth is the viewing platform from which we observe the stars. So changes in the orientation of the Earth itself will change the star field, our view of the star field. And those changes unfold at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And 600 times 72 is 43,200. It is a monument that faces perfectly due north, south, east, and west, that is therefore speaking to our planet, that encodes the dimensions of our planet on a scale defined by our planet itself, the wobble of precession. Why would it not be interesting if it was 1 to 57,000? Because that's not a number that has anything to do with the story of the Earth itself. But 1 to 43,200 is part of a sequence of numbers that are found in ancient mythology all around the world. 43,200, 432,000, so on and so forth. 2,160 is 30 times 72. These numbers are encoded in and directly stated in ancient mythology all around the world. So I don't think it's an accident that the Great Pyramid is built on that scale, that it encodes the dimensions of the Earth, and it does so on a scale set by the Earth itself. That's incredibly clever. That's not something that Egyptologists should ignore and reject as just irrelevant. It's something that they should get to grips with, because it's by no means the only mysterious aspect of the mathematics of the Great Pyramid. the number pi is also incorporated into the Great Pyramid. There's so much more. I go into it in depth in my books. But this is, first and foremost, a work of beauty, a work of astounding majesty, a work that touches those who are willing to be touched. It touches us in the heart. And then it's a work of mathematics. It's a work of geometry. It's a work of astronomy. And it is a work of master masons. The people who made that were not slaves. They were people. Every person who worked on that site, whenever it was built, knew exactly what they were doing, and they were skilled professionals from beginning to end. And I can say that, having climbed that monument 5 times and been in every single chamber that is known so far in the Great Pyramid. This is fundamentally an impossible task that somehow was made possible.
Then comes the part that always gives me chills, when Graham begins to talk about the layout of Giza, how the 3 pyramids line up with Orion's belt, how the Sphinx and the Valley Temple seem placed with impossible precision. It's as if whoever built them wasn't building for their time, but for whoever would rediscover them thousands of years later.
Suggestion for the Younger Dryas climate weirdness. He attributes it to solar outbursts. Maybe he's right. You know, in many cases, the evidence for solar outbursts and the evidence for comet impacts in the form of proxies is rather similar. Maybe both are possible. Maybe it was a comet impact at the beginning of the Younger Dryas and a massive solar outburst at the end of the Younger Dryas. You know, it's an open question. But what we do have is very clear evidence that the planet did pass through a cataclysmic event in that 1,200-year period between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago. And the extinction record of megafauna alone is enough to bear witness to how bad that was.
And there's a energy paradox too, right? Like, where did all that energy come from to melt all that ice so instantaneously?
That's where I think the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis really has something useful to offer in this sphere. And that's again where I find this toxic atmosphere of science, so-called debunking, so unhelpful, because you know there are many scientists who've put forward all the evidence for the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, but there are also a bunch of scientists who really hate their work and do everything possible to undermine and dismiss it. Wouldn't it be better if different scientific groups who've got skin in the game of a particular theory recognize that others may have skin in the game of a different theory and see if they can find some common ground, rather than this constant sort of pissing contest that goes on between scientists and that goes on against those of us who are not scientists but are proposing points of view that are not accepted by mainstream archaeology. I'm just going to glance at my other computer because I want to reference you to something. 1 second.
No problem. Yeah, this is great.
What I wanted to mention to you is an article in Nature. Of course, Nature is a highly respected scientific magazine, and it's and the title is "Science's Gollum Effect. PhDs bear brunt of territorial behavior." It's all about how scientists have this kind of Gollum-like wish to possess their field, and will do anything, including unethical things, to stop other people entering their territory. This incredible precious, my precious. You know, it's actually something I think you could animate with considerable.
Oh yeah.
The Gollum effect of in science, and the Gollum effect is incredibly strong in archaeology. Archaeology has got about 15 golems who are all goleming around trying to make everybody else miserable, and they don't actually seem to do any real work themselves, but what they devote their entire lives to is trashing the work of other people. What a pity! What a waste of intellect! Why not look for what's good in somebody else's work rather than what's bad in it?
Yeah, one of the problems in academia I see is that everybody's so specialized that they get in such a small, narrow world that they kind of miss the bigger picture, and it's very valuable to have people that can zoom out and just look at myths, look at astrology, astronomy, geology, and combine all these things and just see the whole landscape.
So that we don't have a mono narrative, but we have a narrative that respects the the diversity and complexity and mystery of the past. That's what's needed. And this fight to create an archaeological mono-narrative about the past is, in my view, increasingly sinister. I don't understand why people have that mindset and why they feel. Fundamentally, at the heart of it is a very sneering, dismissive attitude towards the intelligence of the general public. Don't these so-called debunkers realize that adults can actually make up their own minds on things? They don't need to be told what to think. What people need these days is a variety of views, and then go through that variety of views and come to your own opinion about it.
So if you were suddenly given $1 trillion and you were put in charge of our archaeology, what would be your move?
I think that first and foremost, I would like to see the areas of the world that have been underserved by archaeology. I would like to see them extensively investigated, not just with passing site surveys, but with thorough and detailed investigation. I've been accused of presenting a God of the gaps argument when I say that archaeology hasn't done enough. But the gaps that I draw attention to are really important gaps. One of those gaps is the Sahara Desert. Yes, archaeology has been done in the Sahara Desert, but not enough, not nearly enough. Not nearly enough to take account of what we now know about the environmental history of the Sahara Desert as we go back to the last ice age. That there were periods when the Sahara Desert was green and fertile. The story of the Sahara Desert is barely been touched by archaeology. And I would like to see much more being put into investigating the whole question of the origins of civilization in the Sahara Desert. Let's have a look at that whole area. But it's not the only area where we should be looking for the origins of civilization, where archaeologists haven't looked yet. Another that I draw attention to is the Amazon rainforest. And again, the work that is now being done in the Amazon, fortunately, a wonderful philanthropist named Eugene Yong, who you may have met in Sedona, has provided the funding necessary for Marty Parson and Alcea Ranzi and their team to do the necessary LiDAR work, exploring more and more of these extraordinary earthworks that are appearing in the Amazon rainforest, where nobody thought that any kind of organized society had existed. And suddenly we have these huge geometrical earthworks that are being revealed by LiDAR and that then can be ground truthed by small archaeological teams who do no harm or damage. Evidence of huge cities in the Amazon is beginning to come out. I think we're just beginning to we're just getting the beginning of the grand story of the Amazon and its role in the origins of human civilization. And again, I would like to see much more effort put into that investigation. And coupled with it, I think the world needs to understand how precious a resource the Amazon rainforest is. Precious resource of biodiversity, a precious library of human knowledge in the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, who hold a heritage going back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, far longer than archaeologists would allow. We have to recognize the problem in the Amazon is fundamentally the poverty of urban dwellers, particularly in Brazil, who understandably, wishing to feed their families, head off into the Amazon and slash and burn and plant a farm. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because of economic need. The international community has so many economic resources. Cannot we make it worth the while of those who are presently driven to desperate slash and burn techniques? Cannot we not make it worth their while to treat the Amazon as a garden, to care for it, to love it, to be its caretakers, to make sure that no further damage is done to it? That would be a great thing for the international community to invest in. The people make rational economic decisions. If it's in the rational economic if it's a rational economic need for those who are being driven by poverty into the Amazon to burn the rainforest and plant farms that'll only be fertile for a decade or so, if they see it's in their economic need not to do that and that they can economically benefit from not doing that, that's what they will do, and the Amazon will be safe. But instead, this madness goes on. So there's a huge untold archaeological story in the Amazon. And thanks to people like Marty Parsonen and Alceo Ranzi, that story is now beginning to be told. And I think it's going to just open up grand vistas on our past. And last but not least, the submerged continental shelves, the areas that were above water during the Ice Age when sea level was 400 feet lower than it is today, and that are underwater now. Which include the whole of the vast peninsula, Ice Age peninsula that geologists refer to as Sunda Land, which incorporated the Malaysian peninsula, all of the Indonesian islands, and extended as far as almost as far as Papua New Guinea, where you have Sahel, a connection between New Guinea and Australia as well. These areas would have been prime real estate during the Ice Age. The Northern Hemisphere was a pretty horrible place to be at the peak of the Ice Age. I mean, really, it was arid, it was cold. I mean, it was an awful place to be, but down near the tropics, that was the place to be. That was the place to be during the Ice Age. That's kind of places we should be looking for a lost civilization. And Sundaland, the submerged area around the Indonesian islands and the Malaysian peninsula, that area is almost continent in size, would be one of my prime targets. I'd like to see much more investigation there. I'd like to see much more underwater investigation off the coast of India as well. I've already done some myself. I've dived at Pumpahar, I've dived at Mahabalipuram. There are man-made structures underwater there. The visibility is very poor, but there's no doubt they're man-made. It's even been confirmed by India's National Institute of Oceanography. Much more work needs to be done. Much more work needs to be done up in the northwest, in the Gulf of Cambay, where sonar surveys have clearly identified man-made structures at a great depth, and at Dwarka. All of these places are connected by traditions of a global flood. We should be looking at them much more closely and paying much more attention to those traditions. So if I were in a position to influence the course of archaeology, I'd say, guys, carry on doing what you're doing, but do this as well.
Well, I'm so encouraged by this new technology of LiDAR and Doppler, that we're able to investigate these sites without really damaging them at all, right?
Yeah. This is certainly the case. Certainly the case with LiDAR, and we're seeing very interesting results from satellite scans, which much more work needs to be done before there's any certainty about those results. But they're extremely interesting right now.
So I guess I've got to bring up the $1 million topic. There was a discovery underneath Egypt recently, and that's gone completely viral. There's a lot of sensational takes out there, and I don't think I've heard you publicly say anything about this discovery.
You have?
I
have probably said something.
Oh, good.
I'm going to tell you about it. Just a moment.
Because I remember being at your event, everybody was asking you about it, and this was like a month ago. You were cautious to talk about it then.
I said, look at my blog. So what I said in my blog on the 17th of April was that for those who've asked, I'm far from ready to take a position on the recent claims of underground structures detected beneath the Khafre Pyramid at Giza. I'm not even sitting on the fence because there isn't a fence to sit on yet. Much more work needs to be done. What is clear, however, is that critics of Filippo Biondi's findings have misunderstood the potential of the method used and have been too hasty in dismissing it. In my opinion, the importance of Biondi's work is not that it proves anything at this stage, but that it should act as a spur for further research, which I have reason to believe will soon follow. So I could read more of it, but it's on my website, it's in my blog, and that is my statement of position. I don't know enough about the technology, but I have been working with a number of other people who know a lot more about it than I do. And it's beginning to be clear that the massive, instant, allergic reaction of dismissal that came from all the usual skeptics about Filippo Biondi's work, that instant rejection, that instant hostility, that instant sneering was yet another example of premature rejection in science. It's too early to reject this idea. The idea actually has quite a number of very interesting things going for it. And I will be appearing with Filippo Biondi sometime next week with him and Armando May and Corrado Malanga and my colleague Mano Seifzada as well. Primarily, we want to understand their method better. We're not amongst those who are saying, "Oh, this is rubbish, go away." We think it's interesting, and there are a number of ways.
But the deeper you go, the more everything starts pointing to one thing: the Sphinx, the guardian of the desert, carved from a single block of limestone, older than the pyramids it watches over. When Graham talks about it, you realize this isn't just a statue, it's a question carved in stone. Who built it, when, and why, and what could be hidden beneath its pores?
So speaking of sort of beauty in Egypt, we couldn't have Graham Hancock on the show without discussing the Sphinx. The Sphinx is something I'm absolutely fascinated in, obviously with the work of yourself, rest his soul,
Robert John West. Robert Schoch,
yeah. So I want to hear it from yourself, Graham. Sort of, what's your take on the Sphinx?
We were talking about being at the top of the Great Pyramid and the incredible view of the surrounding desert and the surrounding pyramids, and part of that view is the Great Sphinx. And it's interesting when you're up at the top of the Great Sphinx of the Great Pyramid, how small the Great Sphinx looks. It's not small. It's 270 feet long and 70 feet high. But from that altitude, looking down quite far away across the Giza Plateau, you don't at first notice the Sphinx. You're looking at it from the back rather than from the front. It's a remarkable monument and, of course, a controversial monument. The position of mainstream Egyptology and of all archaeologists is that and this is generally stated as somehow a proven fact, which is beyond dispute and isn't worth discussing from the point of view of Egyptologists. They say that the Sphinx was the work of a pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, not Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid, but his successor Khafre, who built the 2nd pyramid. They say that the Sphinx is the work of Khafre. What do they base that on? Well, they base it on trivia, actually. First of all, that the Great Sphinx is approximately in line with, although by no means certainly in line with, the 2nd pyramid that is attributed to Khafre, again on no particularly good grounds. And then they base it. This is one of the most tricky and I think dishonest things that Egyptologists have done regarding the Sphinx. They base their notion that Khafre built the Sphinx on a stela that stands between the paws of the Sphinx. Still stands there to this day. You can go see it. And that stela was not put up in 2500 BC when Egyptologists think Khafre built the Sphinx. That stela was put up at around 1,200 years later, about 1250 BC, by the pharaoh Thutmose III. Thutmose IV. On that stela, he recorded a dream that he'd had. Apparently, he'd been out hunting in the desert, and he'd found the Sphinx almost completely buried in sand. Only a little bit of the head of the Sphinx stuck out. And he fell asleep in the shadow there in the afternoon, and had a dream. And in that dream, the Sphinx spoke to him and said to him, "Why are you leaving me like this? You must clear me. You must restore me." On that stela, as well as recording the dream, in the 13th line, there used to be, amongst other broken letters, the single syllable kaf. It was a single syllable in ancient Egyptian language, kaf. Not Khafre, and it's not surrounded by a royal cartouche, which royal names normally are. But on the basis of that single syllable, which no longer exists, it was recorded in the 19th century, but it's flaked off since. On the basis of that single syllable kaf, on a stela put up 1,250 years after the date that Egyptologists say the Sphinx was supposedly created, that single syllable that no longer exists is the primary evidence connecting the Sphinx to Khafre. And to my mind, that's no evidence at all, particularly since we have another stela, the inventory stela from the Giza Plateau, which Egyptologists dismiss because its narrative doesn't fit with theirs, which says that the Sphinx was already there in the time of Khufu, that Khufu saw the Sphinx, the predecessor of Khafre saw the Sphinx, so Khafre couldn't have built the Sphinx. Build is the wrong word for the Sphinx. The Sphinx is actually carved out of solid bedrock. And there are two reasons that I and my colleagues think the Sphinx is much older than 2500 BC. We do not separate the Fourth Dynasty from the Sphinx entirely. We believe that the Fourth Dynasty restored the Sphinx, rather as Thutmose would do in a later time. That the Fourth Dynasty restored the Sphinx, but the Sphinx was originally entirely a lion, not just the body of a lion, but also the head and the mane of a lion. And that in this restoration, the part of the Sphinx that was most damaged at that time, during the Fourth Dynasty in 2500 BC, this ancient Sphinx, already ancient then, the part that was most damaged was the head. And our suggestion is that they cut down that original lion head and shaped it into the head of a pharaoh wearing a Nemes headdress. Whoever that pharaoh was, he doesn't look anything like Khafre. But we think that head, that lion head, was remodeled into a human head, and that's why it's so small by comparison with the rest of the body. The ancient Egyptians were very good at proportions, and the proportions are just dead wrong on the Sphinx. So first of all, we think it was a lion, not a lion body and a human head originally. Secondly, we come to the issue of the erosion patterns around the Sphinx. And these are very important, and here a number of names must be paid tribute to, and there are Schwaller de Lubic's, who first noticed decades ago, back in the 1930s, I think, that there appeared to be some sort of water erosion around the Sphinx. John Anthony West, the late great John Anthony West, a dear friend of mine, who I knew for many, many years and spent a lot of time with. It was John Anthony West who followed up Schwaller's initial observation and looked at the erosion patterns on the Sphinx and said, this does not look like wind erosion. What is going on here? And that's when he called in Professor Robert Schoch, a professor of geology at Boston University. And Schoch did a detailed study, including taking sonar readings all around the Sphinx. And he came to the conclusion that the erosion patterns, which are particularly visible in the trench out of which the core body of the Sphinx was cut, on the Sphinx itself, there's been so much restoration over so many thousands of years that it's hard to see the original. There are some, but it's hard to see them. But on the trench surrounding it, you can see it clearly. And what those erosion marks speak to, in Schoch's view, is heavy rainfall for a very long period of time. Not a flood, not a Nile flood rising up to the Sphinx, that would not happen, but heavy, heavy rainfall, sustained rainfall over a period of about 1,000 years, which would selectively hollow out the softer areas of rock and fissures in the rock and expose those, and leave this kind of rolling, undulating profile with fissures through it that you see precisely around the Sphinx. In Schoch's opinion, this is precipitation-induced weathering, rainfall weathering. So the next question becomes, was there rain like that in Giza in 2500 BC, 4,500 years ago? The science of paleoclimatology is quite well advanced, and we know that there was no more rain on the Giza Plateau 2500 BC, 4,500 years ago, than there is today. There is some rain, but it's very dry, and there's very little rain, and not enough to even begin to cause that kind of level of erosion. So, as Schoch, and I want to pay tribute to Robert Schoch for his courage, for being a mainstream academic who stuck his neck out, who suffered the slings and arrows of outraged Egyptologists. How dare he say something that they don't agree with? I want to pay tribute to him for his courage and his honesty in coming forward with the facts here, which have opened up a whole new dimension in the study of the Sphinx, which Egyptologists are still resisting. And Schoch's latest work on the Sphinx connects it to the Younger Dryas period, about near the end of the Ice Age, about 12,500 years ago, when there were heavy rains in Egypt, and those rains were sustained. And this was the time also of the Green Sahara. A lot of people don't know this. The Sahara wasn't always a desert. The Sahara was once filled with lakes and rivers. It was a humid place, not a desert at all. So Schock is putting the age of the original carving of the body of the Sphinx back now 12,500 years. Not 4,500 years, but 8,000 years before that. And of course, he has suffered just a constant series of attacks and complaints from Egyptologists. But there it is. The geology speaks not to 2,500 BC, but to 10,500 BC, 12,500 years ago, rather than 4,500 years ago. So then we come to the astronomy. There's something
That's the part I like.
and this is where another name must be mentioned, and all due credit and tribute must be paid to Robert Bauval, a dear friend of mine. Robert has been unwell for many years, and his voice has not been heard for quite a long time, but it needs to be heard. And Robert, if you're listening, I wish you well and a swift recovery. We need your voice back in this discussion about the past. It was Robert who was the first not only to observe, but to draw conclusions from the fact that the Great Sphinx, this 270-foot long, 70-foot high monument carved out of solid rock, faces precisely due east. Not a bit to the north of east or a bit to the south of east, but precisely due east. Precisely due east is a very important direction in ancient astronomy. It's where the sun rises at dawn on the equinox, the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, the 21st of March. The sun rises in the same place at the autumn equinox as well, perfectly due east. If you go to Giza on the summer solstice, 21st of June, and observe the horizon, go there before dawn, observe the horizon, you'll see that the sun is rising far, far to the north of the gaze of the Sphinx. If you go there at the winter solstice, you'll see the sun is rising far, far to the south of the gaze of the Great Sphinx. But if you go there at the spring equinox and stand behind the Great Sphinx, you'll see the sun rises in direct alignment with the gaze of the Sphinx. So whatever else it is, the Sphinx is a monument that was carefully designed, cut in such a way that it would be oriented perfectly to the rising sun on the spring equinox. And that then brings us to the next question. This is where Robert's work is so important. The next question is the constellations of the zodiac. Now, Egyptologists, of course, say that the zodiac was something that was invented by the Greeks or the Babylonians, that the ancient Egyptians had nothing to do with it. Again, I've gone into this in depth in my books. That's rubbish. Knowledge of the zodiac is far, far earlier. The Babylonians and the Greeks were borrowing from much earlier traditions. You can find representations of constellations that we recognize today as zodiacal constellations. For example, Taurus the bull. You can find representations of the constellation of Taurus, including the stars of the Pleiades on its shoulder. You can find those representations in the cave of Lascaux in France, which are more than 17,000 years old. Knowledge of what we call the zodiac was very, very old at the time it was set down in lasting form by the Greeks and the Babylonians. So it was considered in the ancient world, and it's still considered by many today, that the constellation that rises behind the sun at dawn on the spring equinox marks the character of an age of the Earth. So today, the constellation that houses the sun at dawn on the spring equinox is the constellation of Pisces. We live in the age of Pisces. Another 150 years, we're almost through with the age of Pisces. We've been in the age of Pisces since the time of Christ. Each of these ages lasts 2,160 years. We're almost through with the age of Pisces, and we do live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It will be the constellation of Aquarius. And this is all caused by that wobble on the axis of the Earth that changes the star field as viewed from Earth. We will be in the age of Aquarius within 100 or so years. So, let's go back further in time. What was the constellation that housed the sun at dawn on the spring equinox before Pisces? Well, it was the constellation of Aries. And at that time, the ancient Egyptian symbolism focused very much on rams. And for example, the colonnade at the entrance of the great temple of Ammon at Karnak in Upper Egypt has this row of ram-headed sphinxes. This was the age of Aries. They were paying tribute to that astrological age. You go back before the age of Aries, before about 2000 BC, and you find yourself in the age of Taurus. And at that time, ancient Egyptian iconography was all about bulls. Bulls were everywhere. So actually, if the ancient Egyptians were the people who originally carved the Great Sphinx, it would have been logical for them to carve it in the form of a bull in 2500 BC, when Taurus was the constellation that housed the sun on the spring equinox. But it's a lion-bodied monument, and we are very confident that it was a lion-headed monument as well. Again, there's many reasons I don't have time to go into here. And therefore, you have to ask yourself, when was a constellation that looked like a lion housing the sun at dawn on the spring equinox? When, if you stood on the Giza Plateau and looked for the rising sun, stood there an hour before dawn, what constellation would you see lying on the horizon? And as you go back through the ages, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, keep going back, and 12,500 years ago, you come to the age of Leo. It's the constellation of Leo that's housing the sun then. So I and my colleagues believe that not only is the Sphinx geologically ancient, but it's also astronomically ancient. It's an equinoctial marker celebrating and honoring the age of Leo, which was roughly a 2,160-year period from about 12,800 years ago.
It's fascinating.
And to me, these are matters that Egyptologists should pay attention to. Even the most ignorant Egyptologists, when it comes to astronomy, do know that astronomy was very important to the ancient Egyptians. They do know that the Great Pyramid could not have been aligned so perfectly to true north without the use of astronomy. They know that. And yet they're not recognizing the possibility that the ancient Egyptians may have understood these astronomical ages, may have understood the effects of precession on the visible star field, and may have encoded that into the structure of the Great Sphinx.
Exactly, and I suppose it goes back to what we what we said at the start of this interview. Sorry, with the unnecessary pushback. You can't label so many things coincidence after coincidence, and the way it's not like, Graham, you just highlighted something there, like you've just had a wild stab in the dark.
No.
That's an educated theory that you've broke down. Why wouldn't people be open to that? That's
at least
so
be open to it,
frustrating.
rather than sneer at it and smear it and insult everybody associated with it and try to make their lives as miserable as possible. I mean, my goodness, the attacks that Robert Schoch has been subjected to on the grounds of geology, the attacks that Robert Boval has been subject to on the grounds of astronomy, just because what these two figures are saying about geology and astronomy don't coincide with the fixed, firm, rigid, unchangeable view of Egyptology. Egyptologists turn on them and try to ruin their lives and smear and destroy them.